Alright, now we are in our week 5 part 6, which is know your data. I'm sorry because of the cut off just now, because I wanted to make sure everything is like, everything is like structured in a way, so it's a lot more clearer for you to actually learn things. Alright, now the very first thing, right, when we are going into data manipulation and etc., right, the very first thing you need to know is you need to understand your data first, right? So in this subtopic is we are going to learn how can we read data and understand our data first before we go to manipulation. All right, now let's go to the very first thing, which is we are going to learn how can we read CSV data. All right, so how can we read CSV data? The very first one is we need the CSV data first, right? So in this case, the CSV data that we are going to use, let me just go here, is, what is it called? Tutor with 5 underscore tutor flags, right? Okay, so we need to go to ETM 5950. I think I didn't put in ETM 5950 yet, but never mind. And then you go to dataset, right? We have week 5 tutorial flights. I'll just download this one. Alright, week 5 underscore tutorial underscore flights, right? Now, we wanted to learn how can we read the data. So the syntax for reading the data is basically read.csv. So let me just try here. How can we read the data, right? So we already load the installer packages and library deployer, right? Now we wanted to read the data, but before we read the data, right, we just downloaded just now, but we haven't put in our notebook yet. So how can we put in our notebook is basically you need to press this folder and then press the upload icon over here. And then lastly is just like click this w5 underscore tutorial underscore flights.csv. Now your file is going to be here. Alright, so in order for us to read this data, what we have to do is we have to like create one file first, one variable first, which is maybe flights. I think flight is okay, is equal to read.csv. alright, and then the name of the file, in this case the name of the file is week 5 underscore tutorial underscore flights.csv. If I run, everything is successful, and then let's say print. Let's print and see this is our data. Alright, if you remember, right, this data is data frame. Alright, if you remember, data frame is in the tabular data. What does it mean by tabular data is we have columns and we have rows over here. Alright, so that is what tabular data is. Alright, and this is what our data is, which is w5 underscore tutorial underscore flights. Alright, so we have successfully read the data. Alright, so the next thing is basically you can also read the data not only by CSV file, but you can read based on Excel as well, JSON and etc. There are so many data you can actually ingest by using R. Alright, so but the most common one is normally it is a CSV. Alright, so that's why I only provide one example, which is .csv. But if you want to ingest, or if you want to do the manipulation analysis for your other type of data such as Excel, JSON, SQL, Parquet data and etc., it is possible as well. So that's the reason why we provide this slide, because I wanted to tell you it is possible for you to use other data than CSV. Alright, now the next thing is, before we go further, right, one of the process in data analysis is for you to actually knowing your data first. Alright, knowing your data meaning that you can inspect your data, so you know how is the structure of your data. So there are a few things that we are going to learn here. The very first one is head, which is you can identify the first 10, if I'm not mistaken, the first 10 of data, and tail the last 10 of data. Let me just check. Okay, and then we have names, which is to check the columns names, and then we have dimension, which is to check the shape of the data, which is how many rows and how many columns. We have summaries, which provide value, statistical value for each of the columns, and we have glimpse, which provide the column type, the column and data types, and example values. We will go through this thing one by one. Now let's go with the simplest one first, which is head and tail. Alright, so how does it work is basically we can run this one, head or tail, and there will appear, and the data will show, the data will be shown, which is the first 3 data, or if we don't indicate this one, it's going to be the first 10 data, if I'm not mistaken. Now let's try to do head and tail first. Now if I go here, okay, this is flights, right? If I simply print flight, it's going to be a lot of data. But if I print head flights, all right, flights, what's going to be happen is it's going to display, okay, sorry, the first 6 data. All right, so this is data number 1 until data number 6. If I change to tail, what happened is we are going to get the last 6 data. So the last row is actually 543 until 538, 538 until 543. So that is the simplest understanding of head and tail. Now let's go to head back. Let's say you don't want 6 data, you only want 2 data. Alright, so you can just simply put 2, and then what happen is, you need to put comma 2, then you get the first 2 data. If you change to 10, then you get the first 10 data. Similar with tail, if you go to if you make 2, right, 2 here, right, it's going to show you the last 2 data only. Alright, 543 and 542. If you put 10, then it's going to be 534 until 543. That is how it works. Alright, so I really hope this is clear for the simplest one first. Alright, so that is the first one. The second one is, let's say you wanted to understand, or you wanted to know what are the columns in this CSV, right, which is in this case flights. So how can you do it is you can do it by using names. Alright, so what you can do is you can just simply put names, flights over here, and then you will get the whole column name. In this case, we have flight ID, month, date, yada yada until distance. Alright, now the second one is dim, which is the shape of the data. So if we wanted to understand how many columns and how many rows did this data have, right, we can just simply put dim and then flights. Alright, then in that case, we have, and we know we have 543 rows or 543 datas, and we have 10 columns. Alright, so that is dim, and last one is summary. So what is summary is basically, if you run this one, you will get statistical data for each of the column. Alright, so let's say we have airtime, right? And the airtime distance is like the simplest one to explain. So meaning that in airtime, the minimum value for air underscore times, right? Let me just give you some context. So minimum value for this airtime, right? This airtime, right? All of this airtime is actually 42. Alright, this one is minimum. The median is 172, the mean is 183, and the maximum is 340. So let's say if you wanted to get statistical data from the data frame, what you can do is you can just simply use summary flights. Okay, so that is summary. Alright, so and then the last one is basically glimpse. So what glimpse does is it shows the structure of the data. It will provide you with the row, columns, and then your column name here, and then your column data type and sample data over here. So if I simply put glimpse over here, right? Glimpse flights, what happened is I get this whole thing. So this one is sample data, this one is data type for each of the column, this one is column name, and this one is the shape of the data, alright, which is the dimensions. Alright, so I think that's it for knowing your data for the most basic part. So always in your assignment or anything, right, after this, the very first thing that you need to do is you need to explain your data first, knowing your data first, right? And then only we can proceed to the next thing, which is data manipulation. All right, so I think that's it first for now. I will see you in the next video, which we are going to explain about data manipulation. Thank you. Bye bye.